Welcome to a brand new show called Now That's Weird. Now, for just under 2 years, I've been doing this as a radio show on the internet. And we've come across some very strange phenomena over that period of time. Everything from UFOs and alien abductions to Bigfoot, to the Chupacabra, to ghosts and poltergeists. So now we're going to be bringing you these things every week here on Now That's Weird. We're going to start tonight talking about UFOs. Just before we do, let me tell you, we're filming this at a place called Strode College in Somerset in England, just a few miles down the road from Glastonbury, with the help of first and second year students, giving them their first opportunity in television. So what you see is what you get. My first guest tonight is Captain Ray Bowyer from Airline Airlines. Is that
yep,
Airline Airlines. And let's go back to April 2007 and talk about what happened to you.
Okay, yeah, it was Airline Air Services, by the way, based in the Channel Islands, and they operate daily services from Southampton to Alderney. And it was on the afternoon flight, getting airborne about 2:45, where I saw something quite unusual. It was a standard flight, 10 people on board, I think. And just for the people at home, they should know that the airplane is a trilander and it's a through cabin design, which means that people at the front can see what's happening at the back and vice versa. There's no partition in the cabin at all. And just south of the Isle of Wight, I saw what I thought was a reflection from a greenhouse or refinery in Guernsey itself. I thought nothing more of it for a few moments until I looked back at it again a minute or so later, and the same reflection was still there. Now, normally with the critical angle of the sun shining on a flat surface, that angle changes as the airplane moves. And I thought it should have been gone by now. And also, having a look round, I could see that there was cloud extending right the way down through to the south of Guernsey. Good visibility, but there would be no direct sunshine shining down onto the ground in Guernsey, so it can't really be a reflection. So I had a look at it through my binoculars, which I carry with me all the time, and only to see a very distinct, sharp-ended, light-emitting shape, which I thought was initially about maybe 10 or 15 miles away.
Now, were you in contact with air traffic control at this time?
Yeah, I was talking to London at that time, but very soon after got transferred across to Jersey Air Traffic Control. And at that point I was getting a little bit concerned that maybe this was an airplane heading northbound, maybe with landing lights on or something like that. And so I had a brief chat with Jersey Air Traffic just to make sure that, to ask them specifically if they had an airplane at my level some distance away, which they said no, they hadn't got anything on radar at that point.
Now, the actual size of this thing, obviously at first instinct, being a pilot, you've got to be fairly accurate, haven't you? Because it could have been something that was coming into your airspace.
Well, there was no, I hadn't seen anything like this shape before, so I couldn't really assess it to any known sort of aeroplane shape I'd seen before. Also, there was no shadow on the water from the sun because it was overcast. So I couldn't really get a distance, but I estimated at that time to be around about 15 miles away at a similar sort of a level. And I said it was about twice the size of a Boeing 737.
Now, at this point in time, your passengers were also seeing things, I believe, from the windows of the aircraft. Tell us about that.
Well, I was looking at this object through my binoculars, and the chap behind sort of leaned over my right shoulder and said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know. Have a look at it yourself." And sort of passed the binoculars across to him, and he had a look at it. And at that time also I realised that a few other people in the cabin could see what I was seeing, and I was passing this information through to Jersey Air Traffic, and I'm getting sort of a little bit agitated because this thing's getting bigger, so therefore in my view it's getting closer, and I'm wanting to know if there's anything in their way. So I'm talking to Air Traffic Control again. They're assuring me that there's nothing there. However, at that point the controller did say that he had a primary contact to the south of me. Now, it would have appeared that that was to the other side of Alderney, which means that quite likely that this sighting was at least, from first viewing, about 55 miles distant.
Now, you've obviously worked out in your mind as you've got closer and closer that this thing is actually a lot bigger than you thought. How big would you say it actually was?
Well, looking at it through binoculars, of course, gives a false interpretation of the actual distance away, but it got to the point, at an imaginary point on the surface called Ortac, which is 41 miles away from Guernsey, that basically didn't need the binoculars anymore, and this thing was quite visible. At that time I still thought it was north of Alderney, which would mean around about 20 miles away still, having viewed it for about maybe 10 minutes. But it actually turned out to be about 10 miles beyond that towards the southwest. So it was still 30 miles away. And it was at that point, having looked at many cities at night, through flying at night time, a city the sort of size of Derby, something like that, perhaps Milton Keynes, was a similar sort of a size than where I first saw it. So it must have been, in my view, between half a mile and a mile across. I'm pretty sure on that.
Now, we've got to say, haven't we, that something that size is not like any military aircraft that's around at the moment. We have nothing of that sort of size or diameter.
Don't know, do we? Not sure. You mentioned in your introduction that there's a possibility that there are sort of extraterrestrial vehicles. I'm not sure about that at the moment, although there has been a very detailed inspection by a group at Hallam University in Sheffield, with up to about 200 pages now. They can't seem to find any explanation for this, and they're a sceptical group. You know, I'm happy to have them on board for that very reason. I wanted to find out what this was. So yeah, I'm not sure I've seen anything like it before. Well, I'm definitely sure I haven't seen anything like it previously. For that sort of size of machine to be airborne is going to cost a lot of money. And I don't think the British, or perhaps even the American taxpayer, would be able to afford that sort of a machine to be built and flown.
Absolutely. Now, there were other pilots that saw this as well, wasn't there? It wasn't just you.
That's right. Yeah, just coming towards Ortac. Like I said, it's 41 miles north of Guernsey Airport. At that point, a second very similar object hove into view, half the size of the first one, therefore probably twice as far away, but exactly the same shape, with emitting yellow light, a dark graphite grey area, 2/3 of it from left to right as I'm looking at it, and the other object being exactly the same. And the call went out from Jersey air traffic to any other aircraft that may be in the vicinity that could see something similar. And in actual fact, there was a Blue Island flight coming in from the Isle of Man, which called it in. I don't think it's exactly the same time as I saw it. It's slightly later, after I'd gone over to Guernsey approach, but he was still talking to Jersey approach, and yeah, he called it in a one object only, in a very similar position to where I last saw it.
Okay, well, last weekend I spoke to Nick Pope, who's the former UFO investigator for the British government. This is what Nick had to say about Ray's sighting.
Bowyer's Channel Island sighting is clearly one of the most significant UFO incidents to have occurred in recent years. And pretty much as soon as the story broke, I realized that this was an extremely interesting incident, and I decided to take a look at this myself. And I was fortunate enough to make contact with Ray Bowyer, and indeed both of us were asked to get involved with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, a US-based group which draws together people like Ray and myself. In other words, it's an exclusive group of people who have either witnessed a UFO personally, or, like myself, who have taken some sort of official research and investigation on behalf of a government. And both Ray and myself were involved, and indeed are to this day, involved in this initiative. And I've discussed, of course, this publicly at an event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on 12th of November 2007, at which Ray Bowyer and myself were both present. But of course, in the margins of that, really got to spend quite some time with Ray. I'd obviously seen some of the media interviews that he'd been giving. He'd appeared on a number of extremely mainstream shows, sitting in some cases in the cockpit of his aircraft wearing his pilot's uniform, so quite extraordinary in terms of going on the record with a sighting like that. I mean, in terms of what he was talking about, of course, 2-mile-long UFOs, a primary radar return, as was confirmed by air traffic control at Jersey, and a file backing all this up, so it's not even his word for it. There is an audit trail. You can read this case file on the Ministry of Defence website. And I've discussed, as I say, I've had lengthy discussions with Ray about this. He is a very straight-talking guy. What you see is what you get. He tells it like it is. He doesn't embellish. He doesn't extrapolate. This is how it happened. Extremely important and significant.
Well, there you go. Nick Pope, former UFO investigator for the British government there, talking as it was and how he saw it. The interesting thing for me, Ray, with this is that the government normally come up with some excuse. It's a hot air balloon, it's this, it's that. On this one, they chose to say it wasn't in our airspace, so we'll leave it to the French. And the French said, well, we don't think it was in our airspace, so we'll leave it to the British. So there's actually been no answer. What do you make of that?
Well, technically, it's a bit of a moot point, actually. The actual airspace is beneath, I think it's 19,000 feet under the Civil Aviation Authority control by the Jersey zone. Above that, it's French. So I don't know which side of the fence who's jumping off of at the moment, but the British CAA weren't interested in looking at it. The Ministry of Defence came back with a short note saying that as it was no threat or appeared not to be moving towards British airspace, as they called it, they weren't in any hurry to investigate it further. So really, nothing else happened.
Bit of a get out, really, isn't it?
I would have liked to have had a little bit more feedback from these people. They're in the know more than anybody else. But I don't think they felt compelled to have to do that. It's cost money, I suppose.
Now let's come back to the passengers. There was probably quite a buzz going on behind you, because being an open-set aircraft, as you say, you're going to be hearing what's going on behind you. What was the sort of feel going on behind you on the plane while all this was happening?
Well, I've got to say it's probably just about the noisiest aeroplane flying, but even above that there was a general hubbub of sort of what's going on. And certainly the chap behind could see two objects. The people on the row behind that I never got to speak to, unfortunately, but the two people in the row behind that, known to me personally, they're regular customers and fly with Arini a lot. Both of them saw a similar thing to myself. In fact, the lady, Kate, saw two objects also. When we got on the ground, I asked a question without hoping to prompt anybody into any I didn't want to lead anybody into what they had seen or hadn't seen, but I did just turn around to all the passengers through the intercom and said if anybody saw anything unusual and would like to report it, would they come forward and leave their name and address at the terminal, which Kate and her husband John did so, and they've appeared on television also with myself and on many radio programmes, etc., to tell their story, which was pretty much the same as mine.
Now, air traffic control did get printouts of these things clearly visible on the screen. Perhaps you'd just like to explain this to the audience and explain what these markings are, because certainly I don't understand any of this stuff.
Okay, well, it's I have to explain first of all that this is unproven data at the moment, although I believe there has been some more work done recently. But this is what's called a cleaned up picture of the events of the day. Now, this is my aeroplane coming in from Southampton. It's a trace on red there, which ends up at Alderney Airport here. These rings are 5-mile rings from Jersey Airport. These traces were all taken from Jersey and Guernsey and were processed by one computer in Jersey itself. This is the primary object which I believe I saw. There's no hide information, and it was moving from south to north, and we calculated at around about 8 knots, and the total sighting time was around 46 minutes and a few seconds. This is quite likely to be the other object, moving from north to south at the same sort of speed, around about 7 to 8 knots, perhaps possibly slower than that one, and also visible to radar for around about 46 minutes as far as I know. Now this other red line dissecting is the Blue Islands aircraft that was flying in from the Isle of Wight, and when he got to around about this point here, over an island called Sark, he in his 8 o'clock could see an object fitting the description. In fact, those are his words. I can see something fitting the description in my 8 o'clock, which would put it about here from where he was looking at it. So that kind of correlates the two sightings quite nicely, I think.
Absolutely. Now, was there any official word from air traffic control on this, as in, yes, we believe this to be an unidentified flying object, or was there any official statement made?
No. Their duty is to report to the relevant authority. What I did as soon as I landed, I made a report which was faxed directly to Jersey and also to the CAA in London as a possible conflict of one aircraft with another. The other aircraft didn't have permission to be there. So it's my duty under Civil Aviation Authority air law to report what should or shouldn't be in the right place at the right time.
Okay, well, we're going to stick with Ray. In part 2, I'm going to be joined by Alan Foster, who's a UFO investigator. He's been looking into this and other UFO stories, and we're also going to be talking about what is breaking on the forums about a police chase of a UFO over Cardiff. Join us in part 2. Welcome back to Now That's Weird. And in part 2, as well as Captain Ray Bowyer still with us, may I introduce my next guest. He's a world-renowned UFO investigator and lecturer, Alan Foster. Alan, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Now, first off, let's start with Ray. You've heard what Ray had to say in part 1 of the show. What's your take as a UFO investigator on Ray's story?
Well, over the years, I've been lucky enough to speak to many commercial and military pilots and cabin staff who've seen objects going back to certainly '67. And some of the stories are truly astounding. What I do know is, having worked with people from the airline that Ray works with, they all regard him in high regard. So, you know, the story is an amazing case of a very large object or two large objects.
Because you're in the airline business yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, I actually work in the airline industry, and I've done so for about 14 years in various areas, including working with the US military as well. So, you know, some of the stories that we hear, or I've heard, from competent military and commercial pilots are truly astounding.
Now, we talk about Class A, Class B, Class C witnesses in UFO investigation. An airline pilot has to be a Class A witness,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. This is the thing with this subject is that, obviously the government want people who, if they speak about this subject, Nick Pope, of course, is an example, want people with good the ability to see these and know what they're looking at, which is why police, of course, are important, as well as military and commercial pilots. They are regularly looking at, weather patterns and other aircraft. They understand direction of flight, lighting, collision lighting and things like that. So, it's good eyewitness testimony from a commercial airline.
We're talking to the police. A breaking story at the moment as we're making this show is over Cardiff, where 3 police officers apparently gave chase to a UFO over St Athan in South Wales. Apparently they chose to chase it across the Bristol Channel and into Devon. Now, the story one day was slightly different to the story that the police gave in an official statement the next day, where they said, oh, well, it might have been an aircraft. Alan, that was no aircraft, was it?
No, I think not, no. Again, you had 3 pilots from the police in the helicopter. They know what they're looking at. They're out there on a daily basis. So, their initial story of what they'd seen this object, you have to presume they're telling the truth. And then, of course, after that, there is a skewing of that story.
Absolutely. Well, the way I heard it on the first day, one of the police officers actually said they only stopped the chase in Devon because they were running low on fuel. Yeah. Well, that's a strange statement to make and then revert back to them. No chase took place the day later.
Yeah, I know certainly on sort of mainstream TV it was saying that they didn't give chase, but by the sounds of it, they certainly did.
Absolutely. Well, again, we have Nick Pope from last weekend at the Now That's Weird conference talking about this very subject. So let's hear what Nick had to say as the former UFO government investigator.
The sighting by 3 crew members of a police helicopter at RAF St Athan in South Wales in the last few days is one of the most significant UFO incidents, certainly anywhere in the world, I think, certainly this year. The basic facts are these. On 8th of June, the police helicopter was coming into land at RAF St Athan, and suddenly the crew sighted a UFO, and it flashed past their position just as they were coming into land. Now, the story here diverges, and there are 2 versions of what happened. In the initial version that came out when this story broke in the media on 19th of June, was that a chase then ensued, and that the police helicopter pursued the UFO, which was described as disc-shaped and festooned with coloured lights, pursued it southwards across the Bristol Channel, and only broke off the pursuit when A, the UFO was clearly too rapid, and B, they ran short on fuel. Now, interestingly, within a day of that, there was a slightly different version, and South Wales Police issued a statement confirming that the sighting had taken place, but denying that a chase had ensued. And that was quite an interesting about turn. The other interesting thing was the shift in language, because the word UFO had been mysteriously replaced by unusual aircraft. So this is one to watch.
Well, there you go. He was the UFO investigator for the British government, our own Fox Mulder, I suppose you would say, and that's his version of events. Now, he seemed to think there that the first version was probably more likely than the second, and I think I tend to agree. If you see flying discs that you're chasing across a bay, like the Bristol Channel, you can't suddenly say, well, they may have been aircraft. I wouldn't have thought.
Well, the amazing thing is, I mean, I give a lot of talks to sort of community groups and organisations about this subject, and over the years there have been many civilian witnesses to unusual objects in that area, particularly the River Severn, you know, the Bristol Channel. So, you know, going back several decades. So I don't know if this is a specific region, but there seems to be a huge amount of activity of various different shapes of objects as well in this area.
Well, later on in the show, we're going to be discussing what other people are discussing in the forums around the world at the moment. I'm sure this will be on the agenda. But let's go back with you, Alan, for a moment to how you got involved in UFO research.
It was incredible, actually. It was in April 1973, and strangely enough, I was returning from my confirmation into the church. And as I was approaching a small village where I lived in Essex, this was at night, it was dark. As we were driving through the countryside, there was a very bright light remaining stationary over the village for a long period of time. Eventually, this object started to zigzag left and right, coming in our general direction. We began to realise it wasn't an ordinary military or commercial aircraft. So we actually stopped the car, turned the engine off, got out of the car. As this object flew by, probably about 200 metres away, making no sound. And I mean, we're all used to military and commercial aircraft, but when something flies by quite close, making no noise, it has a really strange effect on you. Anyway, this object then flew off. We got back into the car and drove down into the village, and all the lights were out. The village was in complete darkness. As we approached the house, suddenly the lights came back on again. We found the power cut had been about 10 minutes, which was concurrent with the time the craft had actually left the village. And of course, as you know, the more you look into ufology, you find that UFOs often do have an effect on electrical fields of things like cars, houses, villages, or even military bases. So it seemed to be a connected phenomenon.
Now, Ray, when you had your sighting over the Channel Islands, was there any interference with any of the equipment on the plane at the time of the sighting?
No, nothing at all. Not in any way or shape or form.
Interesting, because as you rightly say, this does happen a lot. Now, in your
However,
opinion...
sorry, just to interrupt, still at least 30 miles away when we lost sight of it.
Right,
so it's a significant distance.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of the reports that you get in, and you get a lot of these things regularly, are you starting to find that A, there's more sightings, and B, that these sightings are very similar in shape and description?
The incredible thing is, as I say, as I've researched this for many, many years and spoken to many people from all walks of life, not just vested interests, you know, these are often groups that aren't looking into this subject, and just that when I happen to talk about it, then they'll offer their own experiences afterwards. It's a plethora of different types of objects that are seen. But one case I'd just like to highlight was when I'd actually shown the images of the Carlos Diaz plasma craft. A gentleman spoke, this was at a Royal British Legion talk, and he was a very experienced pilot with 26,000 hours flying time of military and commercial. They'd been flying across North Atlantic towards the UK with a commercial airline with passengers. And during that flight, suddenly this object, similar to the plasma craft, approached the port wing. He called air traffic control in Shannon. And after a short while, 2 US military aircraft approached. And as they did so, this object then tilted a 45-degree angle and then shot off at great speed into space. This was witnessed by passengers and flight deck. When they landed back in Heathrow, they were taken by civilian personnel, and in fact 2 American gentlemen met them for debriefing, asking them not to talk about this subject anymore. But again, he isn't willing to talk about this subject generally, but he offered it up at that time.
Now, your wife Philippa actually paints pictures of organic UFOs. A lot of people have said they've seen UFOs lately that seem to change shape in the sky, almost jellyfish-like in some ways, and also subterranean, where they're going underground and underwater. Now, these type of UFOs, how many reports of these are you getting as an investigator?
Not as many, of course, of what you'd call classic metallic or substantial, solid as we understand craft. But there are a few people saying that they see very highly illuminated objects, and they're not sure whether it's a solid object or it's translucent. I've had another report of a lady who actually saw a craft landing. This was a place called Monkton Farley, which is not far from Corsham and Rudloe Manor, which is a military location. This object landed in the field. Her and her husband saw this at night, 3 o'clock, back in 1998. And it was translucent. It was like a see-through egg-shaped object out of which 4 beings came, and they were seeming to collect samples of grass and things like that. Once they'd done this, walking in a sort of a very quick manner around the object, they then went back into the craft. She could see all of them through this object, as though it was made of glass in effect. It lifted up to about 10 feet off the ground and then took off at high speed instantaneously. She was amazed when she saw this, of course.
We see a lot of these sightings are of translucent vehicles.
Yeah, well, this is it.
We've got Larry Warren coming up in the next section, and he was at the conference last weekend. Yeah. Larry was saying that the Rendlesham sighting was a translucent vehicle. He could see right through it. Yeah. Now, are we dealing with things that we just yet can't understand scientifically, do you think?
Well, that's the thing with that, funny enough, talking about the plasma craft from Carlos Diaz in Mexico. The feeling is that these objects are highly sentient, organic, thinking technology. They are actually aware of themselves, as it were, have sentience, and that they interlink with the occupants in a manner where they recognise the occupant, therefore they wouldn't be able to be used by anyone else but the occupant. So it is highly advanced, possibly using plasma as its creative structure, but definitely something beyond our comprehension in physics at the moment, I think.
Well, there's been a lot of sightings of triangular UFOs, but the thing that always puzzles me with these is they have 3 orange lights, one on each corner, and a flashing red light in the middle, which is pretty much what our aircraft use, the flashing red light underneath the main fuselage. Do you think they could be military craft?
Possibly. I mean, the thing is, I think you have to judge by your heart how you feel about an object. And, something often people when see black triangular craft, there is a real feeling of negativity about them. And they do have the appearance of advanced technology. So they may be, it's hard to say. But, clearly there are these other objects that are so advanced from our comprehension that I would not imagine that they are military.
There is a well-leaked document now from allegedly the skunk works at Area 51 from someone that used to run the skunk works, which is a Lockheed facility in America, allegedly top secret, where he says that they have used back-engineered alien technology.